Welcome to NANP's monthly educational webinar series. I am your host, Andrea Granson, Education Program Specialist for the NANP. Today's topic is Carnivore as an anti-inflammatory elimination diet with Judy Cho. These webinars are recorded and can be viewed at any time by logging into the NANP members area where you can earn 1 continuing education credit. Okay, so let's get started. Judy is known as the people's nutritionist, as her heart will always advocate for the people. She believes in wellness for all and will make her content accessible for every single person. Judy Cho is board certified in holistic nutrition and a certified nutritional therapy practitioner. She is also the author of Carnivore Cure, the ultimate elimination diet for optimal health, and a book releasing in December 2023, The Complete Carnivore Diet for Beginners. Judy focuses on root cause healing and gut health with Carnivore Cure's all-meat elimination diet. Animal-based foods gave Judy a second chance at life, and she is passionate to give back, healing the world one steak at a time. Welcome, Judy. It's a pleasure to host a fellow NANP member. So now it's over to you.
Hey guys, my name is Judy Cho and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition. And I have the pleasure today of sitting down with you and chatting all about the anti-inflammatory benefits of a carnivore elimination diet and how you may be able to use a carnivore diet as an elimination diet in your practice. So before we talk about the specifics and nuance about a carnivore diet, I know it's super controversial. So I think it's important to really just understand the lay of the land about what is inflammation. And at the root of it, inflammation is the body's natural protective response to damage in or on the body. And 2, it's the response to a potential harmful invader. So when threats are perceived, the immune system goes into attack mode to remove that harmful stimuli and then begin the healing process. And the immune system doesn't discriminate between pathogenic or toxic invaders and physical trauma. That's why I think the mind-body work in that area for support is also very crucial. There are different types of inflammation. There's localized inflammation, which occurs at the targeted site of injury or infection. For example, a swollen sprained ankle, an infected swollen cut. And systemic inflammation occurs throughout the body, often triggered by external sources. That could be viral and bacterial infections, allergens, sensitivities to food, smoking and food, or alcohol consumption. And then there's systemic inflammation that's triggered by these internal states, which can be genetics, stress, trauma, obesity, and autoimmune conditions. There are different durations of inflammation. So there's acute versus chronic. Our immune systems evolved to deal with the short-term or acute threats, which are injuries and inflammation or infections, but it's not meant to deal with this never-ending barrage of threats that we now subject the immune system to every day, such as chronic stress, ultra-processed foods, environmental toxins. And so localized systemic inflammation can be acute and last just a few days, very normal. For example, if you were to twist your ankle and you needed to rest. Whereas chronic inflammation lasts for months or years when the cause of inflammation continuously occurs, and often acute inflammation doesn't resolve the situation. And so, for example, autoimmune conditions can set in. So this source of inflammation, and all of my information and sources and citations are all in these little blue boxes all over this presentation, but I pulled this from a Harvard study, I believe, that talked about what are the sources of inflammation. And so these are the major causes of chronic inflammation. There's gut dysbiosis, leaky gut, toxins, infections, environmental factors. Think about mold in our water damaged homes, mitochondrial dysfunction, where you're not getting enough ATP outside of the mitochondria and cellular function, inadequate sleep, insulin resistance, excess stress, advanced glycation end products due to elevated blood sugar, and then poor diet, ultra-processed foods, and vegetable oils. This graphic is important to remember because I will overlay it soon with the carnivore diet. So these are the outcomes and consequences of chronic inflammation. I'm not going to list everything because you have this recording and it discusses all the different diseases in the different systems, but you see autoimmune, bone and joint disease, cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetic complications, metabolic disorders, neurological, and pulmonary. And so in every part of your body, there can be some type of chronic inflammation that then causes systemic disease or chronic illness. So how does inflammation work? Well, these are the few steps in summary. First, the body first isolates the harmful invader or damaged cells. Two, it then clears away dead cells and other damaging debris and substances. And then step three, the immune system begins the repair process. In the details, so the blood vessels dilate and increased blood flow makes the area of injury or infection appear red and warm. Capillaries became permeable, allowing white blood cells to move from the bloodstream to the injured area. This then causes swelling, which allows for isolation of the invaders or damaged cells from the rest of the body. And so then healing can occur from your immune system. And so if you think about how does then inflammation work in different illnesses, I will mention a few. So the first one is cancer. It is thought that chronic inflammation can cause gene mutations in healthy cells, leading them to become cancerous. And then research shows that gene mutations occur as a result of stress induced by the production of reactive oxygen and nitrogen species during the inflammatory process. Cancer cells lure immune system cells into the tumor, resulting in tumor growth. Then the recruited immune cells help grow blood vessels within the tumor, and then it becomes this vicious cycle. So it contributes to cell growth within the tumor and then further gene mutations. Inflammation works in type 2 diabetes. So insulin, which is a pancreas hormone, allows glucose to move from the blood mostly into the muscle cells for storage. With type 2 diabetes, the body does not use insulin well. It could be insulin resistant, or the pancreas does not make enough insulin. Glucose then stays in the body, in the blood, and builds up, leading to higher blood glucose levels. And then the largest risk factor is body weight. So about 87.5% of people with type 2 diabetes are overweight or obese. And then finally, excess fat also contributes to insulin resistance. So fat in the bloodstream, sometimes it's triglycerides, can build up inside muscle cells, blocking insulin from letting glucose get into the cells. So then pro-inflammatory cytokine levels, these are signaling proteins in the immune system inside fat tissues are elevated. So this is why being obese or suffering from obesity can actually cause more inflammation because of adipose cytokines. It's obesity-induced immune response that contributes to insulin resistance. So having excess fat, body fat, triggers inflammation in the body, and then that trigger then will cause more insulin resistance, which then will cause more fatty tissue to build up. And then once insulin resistance is present, insulin resistance itself causes further inflammation. So about 12.5% of type 2 diabetics are not overweight, but inflammation likely is still a large contributor. They may have a normal weight, but high levels of visceral fat. So that's that fat around organs that are not healthy. It's the thin on the outside, fat on the inside. So they suffer from that same fat-induced inflammation as overweight people. Inflammation in terms of comorbidity. So people with chronic inflammatory diseases also have a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So this study shows that 1/3 of chronic hepatitis C patients develop type 2 diabetes. People with RA have a 50% risk of developing type 2. And then people with psoriatic arthritis or psoriasis also have an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. I want to talk a little bit about sugar consumption because we're talking about diabetes. So in 1800s, I think it's always, I know we see this bar graph often where we'll see in the 1700s, they ate this amount of sugar, and now 2009, it's way higher. But I think if we were to just talk about it in numbers, it makes it much more powerful. So in 1800s, they consumed about 22 pounds of sugar a year, which is about 9,000 grams, which then if you were to just average that out by 365 days, it's 27 grams per day, which is equivalent to one medium banana. And in 2009, that's now 176 pounds of sugar, which is about 219 grams per day. And I think honestly, the average American consumes about 300 to 350 grams per day, which then is about the 219 grams per day is about 8 medium bananas. Now, I know this is more sugar, but if we were to just, I pictorially used fruit because fruit is still considered a sugar, and I know it can be debated, but anyway, so Alzheimer's disease is often considered type 3 diabetes, where enough energy is not getting into your brain. So this really just shows you the rise and fall of blood sugar. Your blood sugar goes up when you eat something very carb rich or that has a lot of sugar, then insulin comes to reduce it. Over time, this becomes imbalanced. It's either that your pancreas is not producing enough insulin again, or it's that you're becoming insulin resistant and the insulin just is not functioning as well. If you were to do the math in your body with the amount of blood you have, it's about 5 liters of blood. And then our blood sugar is about 80 to 120 milligrams per deciliter if you were to check your blood glucose. So if you do the math, convert it to grams, it's about 4 grams of sugar in your blood at any given time. So then if you were to convert the grams to teaspoons, it's less than 1 teaspoon of sugar in your blood at any given time. And so the difference between 80 to 120 is less than a quarter teaspoon. And that's how much our body tightly regulates sugar in the blood. And so we just have to wonder, when we are consuming 200 grams per meal or 200 grams or 300 grams per day of glucose or carbohydrates, what is that doing to our blood sugar? And then if you multiply that by decades of eating that way, I don't think there's a surprise in why we're suffering from diabetes or type 2 diabetes. So these are just statistics from the National Diabetes Statistics Report. 88 million Americans suffer from prediabetes. That's 1 in 3 Americans. 34 million Americans suffer from type 2. And this just shows you how if insulin is not working enough, it will not manage our blood sugars. And then we've all learned that then our emergency blood sugar balance, cortisol will come in. So then our endocrine system, our hormone system gets affected. And so instead of cortisol managing our stress response, it's now trying to just help us balance our blood sugar, which is never an ideal thing to do. And so then all cortisol functions take a backseat, because if our blood sugar is not balanced, it can be a life-threatening event. And if you see here, one thing to notice is one of the reasons why ketogenic diets can be effective is if you are insulin resistant and you're not eating those higher glycemic load meals and you focus more on protein and fat, you can reduce your insulin resistance levels. Okay, so how does inflammation work in the brain? So oxidative stress, which is basically too many free radicals, and inflammation can come from higher blood sugar levels and impact insulin resistance. Insulin resistance restricts the brain's access to energy, so the brain becomes insulin resistant. The blood sugar mirrors the brain sugar. So if your blood sugar is rising in your blood, it's also rising in your brain. When there's too much sugar in the brain, the sugar sticks to proteins, causing cellular dysfunction, lipids, causing dysfunction of DNA expression. That's what we call this advanced glycation end products, and then it creates that. So these AGEs, the body creates an inflammatory response with cytokines and reactive oxygen species to try to clear these AGEs. We like to use these antioxidants from especially fruits and vegetables to fight these ROSs. But if we understand how these ROSs even are created, as I just brought up, if we lower the sugar levels, then maybe less antioxidants in general are needed. The brain needs fat. The brain is about 60% fat. So eventually low fuel in the brain can cause all forms of mental health issues, including Alzheimer's. If you reduce glucose levels, you will start to use fat for energy. The fat burning will produce ketones. Fat itself has a difficult time crossing the blood-brain barrier, but ketones has no issue crossing the blood-brain barrier. Ketones meet about 2/3 of the brain's total energy requirement, and the remaining glucose needs can still be produced within the body. And that will help to, again, reduce insulin resistance, heal the brain, and reduce inflammation. The inflammation in terms of mental health and gut health works in this way. There's a connection between depression and gut health due to the gut-brain axis. There's more and more research coming out about this. Poor gut function contributes to a stronger inflammatory response, and this is often dependent on a person's dietary and lifestyle choices. There is a connection between depression and diet. Systemic inflammation is considered a root cause of depression, and so is low fat. So just some numbers on mental health and gut health numbers. 64 million Americans suffer from gut disease. 95% of serotonin is in the gut. And then 50 million Americans suffer from mental illness at one point in their life. Low serotonin is implicated in major depression and suicide. I'll talk about serotonin a little bit more in a later slide. And then 13 million Americans suffer daily, and even more people are suffering with mental health imbalances since COVID. If serotonin imbalance was the only reason that we are suffering from depression, then it should be moving the needle when it comes to antidepressants, but it's not. So in a 2020 pandemic study from the CDC, 40% of US adults were struggling with mental health or substance abuse. If serotonin imbalance was the reason, most people taking SSRI should be healing. But the number of people treated for depression has tripled, and 10% of America is on antidepressants, but more and more people are being depressed. And we are also adding antipsychotics because the antidepressants are not working on its own. And to give you an example, Abilify, which is an antipsychotic, is $1 billion per year drug. And they're also prescribing these things to young children. Leaky gut syndrome, knowing the gut can be leaky, food then becomes a friend or foe. So every bite of food is critical for nutrient density. Plant toxins such as gluten, as we are very aware of gluten at this point, damages the gut lining and causes inflammation. There's a lot of other triggers for intestinal damage. They're all right here. So dietary proteins, low hydrochloric acid and enzymes, medications, infections, blood sugar issues, antibiotics, pregnancy, menopause, toxins, food allergies, and stress. And so it will disrupt that intestinal mucosal lining, and then it will cause there to be a blood-brain breach barrier breach, and then inflammation, autoimmunity, malabsorption, nutrient deficiencies, and just a overload on the inflammatory system. One thing to think about is that in all elimination diets, when there is a need to support some chronic illness, lots of times it's to reset the gut. Every elimination diet intervention contains meat at the very strictest phase of the protocol, but plants are swapped out. So whether it's AIP, FODMAP, WALS, Whole30 GAPS, specific carbohydrate diet, fail-safe diet, gluten-free, casein-free diets, all of them have meat in the first level, but they may reduce some level of carbohydrates. So if we know that carbohydrates or one form of it is not good on one elimination diet, why not just try to remove all plants just to be most effective from the beginning? And you can always add back as you use a food and mood journal and reduce symptoms and have a new baseline, and then you could slowly reintroduce if your patient chooses to. So what is carnivore? Carnivore is an all meat elimination diet. Now, people in the strictest phase may just eat beef, salt, and water, or ruminant meat, salt, and water. We just find that people are less sensitive to just ruminant meat. And so it's a more stricter elimination diet than just all meat. But over time, the goal is to eat a variety. As nutritionists, all different meats have different nutrient profiles, and you'll see that later in the slides. But ideally, you're removing all processed foods. And then for a short time, if you choose to, even removing all plants, because of all plants have some level of anti-nutrients. In 2021, Harvard University published a study looking at how a carnivore diet affected the health of over 2,000 people. And at the end of the 6-month trial, the researchers concluded, and I quote, "Contrary to common expectations, adults consuming a carnivore diet experienced few adverse effects and reported health benefits and high satisfaction." And these are the results from the carnivore study. 98% improved conditions related to diabetes, 97% improved GI symptoms, 96% improved psychiatric symptoms, 95% improved overall health and high level of satisfaction, 93% improved or resolved obesity and excess weight, 93% improved hypertension or high blood pressure, and then 84 to 100% reduced diabetic medication use. I don't know if there's any other elimination diet that has this great of results in terms of a study. Now, there are not a ton of studies on carnivore diets just because who's going to fund a study that's just all meat? But there are many studies on ketogenic diets, and carnivore is a type of ketogenic diet. Now, because we are eating more protein than the average keto diet, you may have some amount of ketones, but it may not be therapeutic. So there are ways to make a carnivore diet more therapeutic keto, and you would have to basically increase more of the fat. So you eat a little bit more animal fats, and you may have to reduce the protein amounts for a little bit. So ketogenic diets demonstrate a reduction in inflammation. Healthy fat restricting sugar helps reduce inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein. And then there are studies that demonstrate ketogenic diets, animal-based diets that remove grains, improve chronic disease, including type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune. Zero-carb carnivore diets normalize SIBO hydrogen levels. It's superior at lowering inflammation compared to low-fat diets. And then it benefits mitochondrial function, inflammatory dermatologic disease, and autoimmune diseases such as multiple sclerosis. So how are benefits with the carnivore diet possible? So carnivore reduces markers of systemic inflammation, such as interleukin-6 and the CRP or the C-reactive protein. It does this by reducing blood sugar imbalances, improves insulin resistance, nourishes the body with nutrient-dense raw materials, especially if you have poor gut function. Meat is probably the most bioavailable nutrients that you can absorb, even if you have poor gut function. And it limits invader proteins and food-like additives and chemicals, anti-nutrients. It restricts plant-based foods that can cause food sensitivities and gut irritation. And then lastly, it strengthens gut barrier function, where at least 70% of our immune system resides. Okay, so going back to this graphic, I summarize the sources of inflammation from a carnivore diet perspective. So gut dysbiosis, leaky gut. Well, the gut starts healing with reduced food toxins, invader proteins, and imbalanced blood sugar levels. Toxins, infections, environmental factors. The immune system is less busy with reduced overall systemic inflammation, so the immune system can be more robust and focus on removing infections, environmental factors, and toxins. From a mitochondrial dysfunction, so there's a dual energy source of both ketones and glucose, which will help to improve overall energy levels. In terms of inadequate sleep, if you have less hypoglycemic events in the night and reduce cortisol outputs, it helps the body to have improved deep sleep, restorative sleep, and less blood sugar dysregulation bathroom breaks. For insulin resistance, carbohydrate restriction helps to restore insulin imbalances, and you can measure that by fasting insulin and C-peptide. And those are two blood markers. In terms of excess stress, when you reduce blood sugar dysregulation, that helps to manage not having to use cortisol to be an emergency brake for your blood sugar imbalances. And then that blood sugar crash that can contribute to stress no longer exists. You still have to balance your lifestyle stressors, but by eating a carnivore diet, you can help alleviate some of that extra stressor. And then advanced glycation end products due to elevated blood sugar. Carbohydrate restriction helps to balance blood sugars, reducing the overall AGE load. And then poor diet, ultra-processed foods, seed oils, and vegetable oils, they're just not part of a carnivore diet. Plant toxins, anti-nutrients as another source of inflammation. So removing plants helps to reduce chronic low-grade inflammation in the body. Every elimination diet, again, removes some level of plants. All elimination diets leave some meat at the strictest stage. Gluten causes gut distress for many, as it is one of the most difficult plant proteins to digest, and almost everyone does better without gluten. Lectins are found in legumes such as peanuts, beans, soybeans, and whole grains such as wheat, and they interfere with nutrient digestion, absorption of minerals such as calcium, iron, phosphorus, and zinc. And then lectins are notorious for surviving the GI tract. I think that's why Dr. Steve Gundry talks a lot about lectins, even though he's more plant-based. So lectins can penetrate cell linings in the digestive tract and cause damage to gut epithelial cells and the membrane lining, changing bacterial flora and triggering autoimmune reactions. Phytic acid is another big anti-nutrient. Phytates are primarily found in whole grains, legumes, seeds, and nuts. Phytic acid can decrease, again, mineral absorption such as iron, zinc, magnesium, copper, phosphorus, and calcium. Studies show that 80% of zinc-rich foods, such as cashews and chickpeas, 80% of phosphorus-rich foods, pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds, and then 40% of magnesium-rich foods, such as spinach, almonds, and avocado, can be blocked by phytates. So if you think about if you're eating a big bowl of salad and you have all these plants in it and you think you're getting all the minerals, but you're eating it with this phytic acid, you may not be absorbing a lot of the minerals that you're assuming you're getting. It's not really what we are consuming, but what we are absorbing that matters in terms of nutrition. And then there was one study that demonstrated that less phytic acid in porridge, which for example is oatmeal, improves iron absorption. So there are many, many countries where anemia is one of the most prevalent illnesses for children. What if we stop feeding our kids oatmeal, and then even if they have less access to red meat, it could still improve iron absorption? Another study showed that phytic acid added to white bread inhibits magnesium absorption. And that also doesn't even talk about how we spray glyphosate on our plants. But another source of inflammation is oxalates. So oxalates are both made in the body and found in plant-based foods. Major cause of kidney stones, oxalates are found in green leafy vegetables, such as spinach, turmeric, soybeans. Oxalates bind to minerals such as calcium and iron, prevent it from being absorbed. And they are enzyme inhibitors that can prevent proper digestion, cause gut problems, protein deficiencies, and then without enzymes, our gut function will not properly occur. And then if you suffer from mold illness or if you've been in water damaged buildings, oxalates exacerbate mold production. So it adds an overall oxalate burden in the body. So the oxalate pathway, there are other reasons why it's not ideal. First of all, you'll see that you can see how the yeast and fungi can feed oxalate production. An oxalate diet can also feed oxalates. And then you'll see ascorbate ravenose. So vitamin C can also, excess vitamin C can also produce more oxalates. And then all the way up top, you see hydroxyproline, protein, and gelatin. This is why I'm not a fan of taking a whole ton of collagen and gelatin. We just don't know if it's really going to support our collagen levels or if it's going to go down and produce more oxalates. I think it's more natural to have bone broth and not take as many of the powders. Plants self-protective toxins and plant nutrients. So there are more species of plants that we cannot eat than we can eat. We're taught at a young age to be careful of picking berries and mushrooms in nature. Why? We can't really forage unless we really know, because most plants are harmful to us than helpful. And oftentimes, most anti-nutrients, again, bind to minerals, and most non-organic plants cause soils to become depleted of nutrients, eventually making the soil barren. It's basically monocropping, where you use the same soil to harvest a certain plant, and then over time, the soil gets super depleted that you can't grow anything. There are anti-nutrients in every single plant-based food, and it's really figuring out which anti-nutrient are you more sensitive to. And it's really, you can give this list of anti-nutrients for plant-based foods to your client or patient, but imagine how unuser-friendly that is. So what if we were to just remove, okay, I don't have to worry about what anti-nutrient there is. Let's just go with no anti-nutrients initially, and then see what you can add back in once your symptoms reach a baseline of good health. There are also nutritional changes in food. You'll see here there's changes in apples, carrots, tomatoes. So one, there are anti-nutrients which reduce our mineral levels. Our soils are getting depleted. And not only that, our apples and our carrots and tomatoes and our crops are just less nutritionally rich. So I just wonder why we still think plants are the best foods for us. I just wanted to bring up kale as an example. So kale, we think it's such a superfood. It's high in oxalates. It's a hyper accumulator of thallium and cesium, which are heavy metals. They often contain residues of nicotine substance used as an insecticide. So even if you're buying organic, they're sprayed with dactyl and other insecticides, which are toxic to the nervous system and considered a carcinogenic. They're very high in another anti-nutrient glucosinolates. They're part of environmental working groups Dirty Dozen, which are foods with the highest pesticide residues. And it also contains thiocyanate, which competes with iodine absorption. And it contains proigoitrins, which is a compound that can interfere with thyroid hormone synthesis. So if you think about how we think kale is a superfood, with all of this included, and we just look at the nutrition facts, it does not align. Another source of inflammation is seed or vegetable oil. So since 1970 to 2018, seed oils have increased by 89% in terms of consumption and availability. Seed oils cause inflammation and oxidative stress. When seed oils are heated, they create oxidation products such as acrolein, which is a known carcinogen, and aldehyde, which is a known cause of heart disease and a possible carcinogen. Unstable oils add more free radicals to the body, increasing that low-grade inflammation in the body, which is why we, again, recommend then consuming antioxidants to grab all those free radicals. But if we're not eating foods or exposing ourselves with too much low-grade inflammation, then maybe, again, we don't need a ton of antioxidants. This is just how canola oil is made. We are scared of consuming beef fat or tallow because of the saturated fats, because it's going to cause heart disease. But just really simply, you can see that canola oil, through this whole process you see on the blue side, the oil gets heated at least 6 to 7 times, and it is beyond the smoke point every single time. So then it would smell like it's burnt. And so that's why they go through this pre-bleaching so it doesn't have a color. And then it also goes through deodorization, as you can see right here. But the deodorization helps to make the oil not smell bad. And if you see where margarine is made, it's all the way down here. It also goes through hydrogenation, dewaxing. I mean, there's just a lot of things that make it so processed. So when you're consuming this oil, we cannot taste any difference on our tongue because, again, it's so processed, but our bodies can feel that low-grade inflammation. Whereas tallow, simply, if you make your own tallow, you're cooking your bone broth, and then that fat, when you cool, at the very top of the bone broth is what tallow is. I think we need to talk about cholesterol because that's the big fear of, well, when you eat red meat, your saturated fats, cholesterol goes up. So what about heart disease? So since 2015, there is no upper limit of dietary cholesterol. They found no correlation, or there's a dietary cholesterol and the lack of evidence in cardiovascular disease. So there is no dietary guideline for cholesterol limits now. And I will read the abstract. It says cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. To date, extensive research did not show evidence to support a role of dietary cholesterol in the development of cardiovascular disease. And as a result, the dietary guidelines 2015 to 2020 for Americans removed the recommendations of restricting dietary cholesterol, which used to be at 300 milligrams per day. And then there's this whole push for statins. There's a 2020 British Medical Journal. They found that 75% of the 35 trials reported no reduction in mortality when participants took this cholesterol lowering drug. Half the people that have heart attacks have normal levels of cholesterol. Heart disease is a new illness. Animal-based foods is an old food. Statins also come with health risks that they never talk about, such as muscle wasting, cognitive impairment, and ironically, heart failure. There are so many risks of low cholesterol, and then there's a lot of roles of cholesterol in the body. So in 2001, in the Lancet, it said our data accord with previous findings of increased mortality in elderly people with low serum cholesterol, and show that long-term persistence of low cholesterol actually increases the risk of death. Thus, earlier that patients start to have lower cholesterol concentrations, the greater the risk of death. And then I will mention a few of the roles of cholesterol. They're all listed below as bullets, but cholesterol is produced by almost every cell in the body. So if you have lower levels of cholesterol, the outer layer of the cell, you have a risk of cell danger response where your body will start shutting down. Cholesterol in cell membranes make cells waterproof so that it changes the chemistry of what's inside and outside the cell. And that's why we have like sodium, potassium pumps in different channels that will allow things to go in and out, because oftentimes they have to be different. It's nature's repair substance. It's used to repair wounds. It helps to repair inflammation. And that's why cholesterol is often found where there's heart disease, because it was going there to repair some of that inflammation. So it is a bystander of a heart attack or a heart disease. It's not the reason why it happened. And then most important hormones, so sex hormones, mineral balancing hormones, blood sugar balancing hormones, all need cholesterol. It's a vital function of the brain and nervous system, protects us against depression. It's needed to create bile salts, which help us to digest fats. It's a precursor for vitamin D. And the cholesterol then is used to produce the vitamin D in the skin, powerful antioxidant. And then LDL cholesterol has been known to fight infections such as endotoxins. I'm sure you're all familiar with the endocrine system, but it's basically the orchestra of hormones. You'll see that cortisol is part of that, and then cholesterol is used to produce all of these hormones. The cholesterol hormone pathway is part of the adrenal function. If the body is overly stressed, overly consuming carbs, under eating, overly exercising, overly stressed with lifestyle stuff or trauma, the body prioritizes cortisol over any of the sex hormones. So you can see all the pathways go every which way. And if you are overly stressed, you will produce more cortisol. If your blood sugar is imbalanced, you'll produce more cortisol instead of producing DHEA, testosterone, estrogen, etc. So fat, again, is needed to create glucocorticoids that helps to balance blood sugar, mineral corticoids, which helps to balance minerals, and then our sex hormones, such as DHEA and pregnenolone. Interesting fact is that most of our cholesterol is produced in our body. I think it's like 65%, or maybe it's even more than that. If cholesterol was so bad, why would our body use all its energy and resources to produce something that is so toxic for our body? So again, this just shows the chronic stress response. You will use acetyl-CoA and cholesterol to then produce pregnenolone, progesterone, and cortisol. And there's many ways that cholesterol goes down to produce the various sex hormones. But if you are stressed, there's such a thing as the pregnenolone steal. So instead of coming here to produce DHEA and testosterone, it will go and produce cortisol. So what happens if there's extra burden on cortisol from blood sugar imbalances, life stressors, but there's not enough cholesterol? And so is then circulating LDL such a bad thing? And then my opinion is that hormone replacement therapies is often a band-aid, even if they're bioidentical. I think you should always try to foundationally support the body, find the root cause of why there is an imbalance. And then if nothing else works, then you can consider bioidenticals. But usually the diet can help a lot. This I took from the NTA, or the Nutritional Therapy Association, but minerals and hormones, you see how minerals, so many minerals support the endocrine system, which all of these are really rich in meats or animal-based foods. Even iodine is the richest in seafood. And then dietary supports. As you can see, there's no real need for carbohydrates. So steroid hormones, thyroid, amine hormones, peptide, and iconosides, they all need quality proteins or quality fat. Animal and plant-based foods are not equal. So food is eventually broken down to raw materials that either support or hurt the body. And then obviously there's absorption and gut maintenance that needs to occur so that we can assimilate, break down, and absorb our nutrients. And carbohydrates are the only non-essential macronutrient. So I talked about serotonin earlier. So several studies show that low cholesterol is linked to depressed mood and impulsivity. Serotonin dysfunction is implied in major depression and also with suicide. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that's produced in the intestines and the brain, mostly in the intestines. And while the serotonin can't pass the blood-brain barrier because it's a neurotransmitter, it absolutely communicates with everything that's in the brain. So where does serotonin come from? Assuming that SSRIs are the answer and serotonin is the answer for everyone not to struggle with mental health. Well, if you eat foods with tryptophan, which is an essential amino acid rich in all meats, it produces more serotonin. You need vitamin B3 or niacin to help boost that tryptophan. You need vitamin B6 to convert tryptophan to serotonin. Folate or vitamin B9 helps your body make more serotonin. And then vitamin D activates genes responsible for neurotransmitter release, such as serotonin. So what foods have a lot of B vitamins and vitamin D? Carnivore foods or animal-based foods. I know people will say, well, you can eat tofu or seeds for tryptophan or take cholesterol-lowering medications, but most of the fat will not convert to serotonin. And this is why another reason why statins come with that risk of depression. Food bioavailability. I know that plant-based foods or plant-based meats are super popular nowadays, but it is not the same. They are not as bioavailable. So plants have conversion issues, especially if you have impaired gut issues or digestion, it'll make it worse. Nutrients in meats are more in the body's usable form. I do see some carnivores, especially if they're not into taking digestive enzymes or hydrochloric acid or digestive bitters, they may show a deficiency in B vitamins, and they're always shocked when I show that. But some people just need more gut support. But for sure, a plant-based diet is not going to support that need even further. So an example of all the difference in bioavailability is like K2 in meats versus K1. K1 has to get converted to K2. Vitamin A, so we think of carrots as being rich in beta carotene, which then is vitamin A, but it needs to be converted. And there are certain people that don't have the genetic type to do that proper conversion. So you think you're getting all this vitamin A that will support your system, but if you're eating carrots and you're not eating it with fat, it's not going to really get absorbed, where you can eat vitamin A from eggs or liver that has much more vitamin A. Another example is heme iron, which is in meats versus non-heme iron in plants. I was plant-based for 12 years, and when I was pregnant with my first child, they said that I had anemia. And for a split second, I thought that was so weird because I was eating a pound of spinach every day. But I ended up just taking iron pills and just called it a day because my doctor knew best. But if you eat red meat, you will not really have issues with iron unless you have a parasite, I think a molybdenum deficiency. And there was one other reason why you can have low iron. Short chain fatty acids, such as butyrate, requires fiber to be converted in the gut. So you eat plants because it has fiber, and that fiber has to convert to short chain fatty acids to then support your intestines. But again, if you don't have good gut function, it's not going to really work. There's studies that show that fiber doesn't get properly broken down or used by the body, and that people actually feel worse taking fiber. Whereas butter is in the butyrate form. Another short chain fatty acid is acetate, which is made from vinegar. So I'm okay consuming apple cider vinegar. This is not dogma. If you can consume fermented vinegar or fermented foods, that may be a benefit later. I know people with fungal overgrowth do not do well with a lot of these fermented foods though. And then vitamin B12, which is not in plants. We have a protein requirement. So there is a fat requirement for our hormones, especially when we're stressed. So to produce more cortisol for all of our cellular, our outside cells, wall lining. And then we have a little bit of an EPA and DHA requirement, but the main requirement we really have is protein. So amino acid researchers recommend at least double the recommended dietary allowance for protein requirements. So the normal amount is about 0.4 grams of 4.4 grams of protein per 1 pound of ideal body weight. So if you weigh 100 pounds, that's consuming 40 grams of protein, whereas we recommend 0.8 grams per 1 pound of ideal body weight. Even if you're not a carnivore, you should be eating closer to that amount to get your recommended dietary protein needs. Reason is, in the US, about 300,000 people, predominantly women, fall and break their hip annually. 50% will never walk again, and 33% will die in that year. A primary cause of the broken bones is due to less muscle to cushion the fall, and bones are also supported by eating enough protein. Protein and exercise help maintain muscle mass and bone strength. One thing that amino acid researcher also told me is that we end up eating the most amount of protein in our dinner. So maybe breakfast, lunch, breakfast, maybe we eat a little bit of oatmeal with some fruit and orange juice and milk. So there's not a ton of protein there. And then at lunch, maybe we'll have a sandwich with a little bit of meat. And then dinner is our big, bulky protein. The problem is that then most of our 24-hour cycle, we're in a catabolic state where our muscles are breaking down to get those amino acids. And so he highly recommends, Dr. Donald Layman is one of the best amino acid researchers, but he recommends that people, especially I think above the age of 35, that we should be consuming protein and at least 35 to 40 grams of protein as our first meal, so that we are now in a state of anabolic, or we're supporting growth instead of breaking down. And so for that reason, generally speaking, I'm not the biggest fan of extended fasting for people over the age of 40. There are ways to also to measure protein digestibility. So these are the different ways. There's PD-CAS, amino acid score, PER, and biological value, and they measure protein utilization, digestibility, and absorption of proteins and amino acids. And you can see here, if you are closer for the PD-CAS, if you are closer to 1, that means that it's full absorption. And as you see, like wheat gluten, for example, is at 0.25. There is such a thing as protein digestibility and limiting amino acids. I'll bring that up in a second, but I wanted to just highlight Beyond Meat, which is primarily pea protein, but people think and pay more money for this Beyond Beef, which is primarily peas. But first of all, look at the PD-CAS, it's at 0.6. So it's better than wheat, but people think they're getting whatever amount of protein it says on the label, but actually you need to times it by the 0.6 because you're not actually even absorbing or utilizing that amount of protein. And there are limiting amino acids, which I'll talk about in a second, which is methionine and cysteine. And if you look at all these different plant-based foods, such as almonds and chickpeas, they are low in lysine. And I think the same doctor or same researcher, Dr. Layman, said that in order for a child in the morning consuming cereal with almond milk to get that amount of lysine that's sufficient for that one meal, they would have to drink a full gallon of almond milk, or you can have 8 ounces of milk. So limiting amino acids, basically amino acids all work together. We have 9 that are essential. And so if you are deficient in lysine, as you could see in the bucket, your amino acid transactions will basically not synthesize beyond that level you have of lysine. So even if you're eating all the other 8 amino acids, if you don't have lysine, it'll stop there. And that's where it becomes super dangerous for eating plant-based meats. So essential amino acids are needed for hormone production and synthesizing proteins and enzymes and creating decoding strands of DNA. All essential amino acids are vital to ensure the body's processes are optimally functioning. And if one essential amino acid is missing, the body is unable to carry out the remaining process. So when I see families buying, and I get it, some people have dairy sensitivities, but you can just eat ground beef then in the morning or bacon. But if you are consuming oat milk or almond milk or soy milk instead of actual milk, it is a disservice to especially children that are growing. And I think soy milk is the better one, but there's just so many hormone issues with soy milk. And so tryptophan and phenylalanine are used for neurotransmitter production, methionine and lysine, and all of these are a little bit less prevalent in plant-based proteins. They're critical for healing and building connective tissues. So what happens if we don't have enough of this one amino acid? Whereas a lot of people don't know about this limiting amino acid thing because meat is sufficient in all of them. So then if we also think of none of that, but just consider gram to gram, you can see that you would have to eat, in order to get the 25 grams of protein in a steak, you just eat 3 ounces. For quinoa, you would have to eat 3 cups of cooked quinoa, which how many people really do that? And then peanut butter, 6.5 tablespoons, black beans, almost 2 cups. And same thing with edamame. So this doesn't even consider nutrients or protein digestion or assimilation. And it's just lots of food to get the same amount of protein that steak again has in 3 ounces. You know, we're told to eat the rainbow with plants, but I just wanted to highlight this one thing. 6 vegetables are actually created from the wild mustard plant. So when someone's like, oh, I'm like eating the rainbow and I'm eating cabbage and Brussels sprouts and kohlrabi, kale, broccoli, cauliflower, you're eating the same exact plant. I know that in the carnivore community and then just adjacent to our carnivore community, a lot of people are really pro fruits, that fruits are nature's natural candy. But our fruits that we eat nowadays is not the same in terms of sugar amounts per food. We purposely breed our fruits to be much sweeter with higher amounts of fructose. And fructose has no stop gate when it hits the liver. So it automatically then converts to, or excess fructose converts to fat on the liver. So that's how we get non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And then add in high fructose corn syrup from our juices and our junk food and our snacks. And it's just a bigger hit to your liver. And then eventually, if you're eating a ton of fruit, which I've seen this in my practice, where people are eating just a ton of meat with fruit, and only fruit, but not much other carbohydrates, their triglycerides will start going up because it's just too much fructose load. Excuse me. Okay, and then is organic even better? I did research when I was writing my book, Carnivore Cure, and we see that organic farms use more natural chemicals and more often. So at a certain point, I know that glyphosate is super bad, but for glyphosate, the average is about 1.9 pounds per acre, whereas sulfur, which is the most organic, the highest used, they use about 8.89 pounds per acre. And then organic farms are next to conventional farms. So if pesticides and herbicides are used, how much is not actually going to the organic farm? I talked to Dr. Stephanie Seneff, and she says there will be some, obviously it'll be less, but there is some amount that organic farms are allowed to have. Sorry. Okay, and then some organic products work so well that the synthetic lab versions have been made. And one of the examples is that spinosad. It works so well that there's now a synthetic version of it, and they don't even call it organic because it's made in the labs. Organic is also less regulated. When I did the research, all of the glyphosate, all of these other toxic synthetic toxins or plant controlled sprays, they are heavily regulated. So they oftentimes will grab plants and then do tests to see how much residue is in them. But when it comes to the organic variety, they don't really do much testing. There was one that I saw, there was a little bit of testing. They grabbed hundreds of fruits and vegetables and they did the testing on the synthetic side and all the different residues. And there was only a little bit of organic and they barely showed any of the results. There was some residue of the non-organic variety on it. And it just makes it easier. If you were to just eat meat, then you don't have to worry about all of this toxins and what's the best. And is this really organic? Has it been flown in from a different country, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. One study found that 84% of vegans and vegetarians eventually go back to eating meat. Not surprised. It's not an optimal way to eat. These are the most nutrient dense foods based on essential vitamins and essential minerals. You can see all the different nuances of each different one. I did include avocado and spinach as a representation of plant-based foods, but you have to remember this does not consider anti-nutrients. It doesn't consider bioavailability. It doesn't consider absorption. So remember, spinach has a ton of iron, but it's that non-heme iron. So how much are you really getting? But then how many oxalates are you getting that are also binding to the minerals? So it's just something to think about. If you're going to eat plants, I always recommend eating it away from your meat. So if you're eating spinach with a bed of spinach on top of and have some beef with it, you may be reducing some of the minerals even from your beef. These are limited nutrients in plants, and it's the corresponding animal-based food that has the largest amount of that nutrient. So vitamin B12 is non-existent, vitamin D3, vitamin K2, a lot of these also have to then be converted. We believe that minerals are the richest in plants, and I argue that. So, for example, we think that potassium is richest in either bananas or avocados, but bacon has more potassium ounce to ounce compared to bananas. Same thing with magnesium and calcium. Magnesium, you would have to eat 105 almonds to be able to reach the daily value or close to the daily value of magnesium. Whereas you can have, so 3.5 ounces of salmon has 24 to 30%. If you're eating like a carnivore diet and having salmon as your main dish, you'll probably have closer to 8 ounces. And so that would bump up your amount to 60% of your daily value. And if then you're eating it more often, you'll get your 100%. I list other cons below the old me where it says almonds. So every single almond, they use a pasteurized, they're all pasteurized and they're fumigated with a probable carcinogen. They're also high in FODMAPs, very high in oxalates, very high in salicylates, high in phytates, and high in lectins. And then we've already talked about calcium from kale and all the anti-nutrients there, or you can just consume a little bit of dairy, or you can even consume sardines. Sardines are rich in calcium as well. I'm going to run through these really quickly because we're running out of time, but you can see I just circled the nutrients that are more abundant in the specific foods, but all B vitamins are rich in all meats, but ribeye or beef is really rich in vitamin B6 and vitamin B12 and selenium. Pork belly is really rich in vitamin B1, so it's all pork, and then niacin, which is B3. Salmon is really rich in many of the minerals, potassium, magnesium, selenium, omega-3s, vitamin C. So there is some vitamin C in animal meats, vitamin D and vitamin E. Oysters rich in different minerals. The zinc to copper ratio is pretty decently balanced. I know zinc should be a little bit higher though, but it's still pretty decent. The egg has a lot of molybdenum, selenium, choline, biotin, and folate. And so this is why, again, I like that whole rainbow of meats. I'm going to take back the rainbow. And so it is ideal to eat a variety of meats because it just has different nutrient profiles. This is really just sharing how egg yolks has more of the nutrition than just the egg whites. Butter is rich in vitamin E and vitamin K. So butter is not just fat. There is nutrition. It's not a ton, but it does have a lot of the fat-soluble vitamins. Chicken wings is rich in vitamin K, vitamin B6, molybdenum, selenium, and choline. There is no nutrient that is missing in chicken wings, by the way, which I was very shocked to learn, but pleasantly shocked. Lamb chops are rich in niacin, folate, and choline. Beef bone broth, there wasn't a ton of information because all bones will be slightly different, but these are sort of the benefits of when you cook your own bone broth or you buy high quality bone broth. And just something to think about is when we have our overall toxic burden on our body, whether it's toxic food, toxic environment, so water damaged buildings, VOCs, just even EMFs, chronic stress, heavy metals, medications, vaccines, trauma, and isolation. Once your symptoms are immense because of this overload, then it just becomes really difficult. And if we can support our dietary habits, this can really reduce that overall burden on our body. We test inflammation in all these different ways. So CRP is a big one, but there are also other inflammatory mediators that you can test. I'm not going to really go through this a lot. I talk about chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which is essentially an illness based on water damaged buildings and your body's just constantly inflamed. One of the markers we test for is MMP9, which is an inflammatory mediator on the innate immune side and not the adaptive. The adaptive side is where the CRP is. So to wrap up, carnivore elimination diet is the most anti-inflammatory, less inflammation from ultra-processed and plant-based foods, supports cholesterol levels, mental health and nutrient status, supports the gut to start building itself back in the cell wall linings, stimulates bile. And I will give you our Carnivore Cures elimination protocol cheat sheet. So that's how, if you wanted to get your patients and clients to start doing an elimination protocol, it goes to the strictest phase again of just doing ruminant meat only. If your client is just trying to lose weight, I don't think you really need to get them on the strictest. You can start with this all the meats and just anything that is not plant-based. And so we do that a lot when someone is just suffering from diabetes or insulin resistance and they're just trying to lose weight and maybe they have some gut imbalances. If someone has an autoimmune illness or more severe chronic illnesses, I do think it's better to go to the strictest level. I also recommend using a food and mood journal. I think most of you know how to use that. So document the food, because that is the best way to know if things are working and things are not, because doing an all meat elimination diet is difficult. But if people can see how they are healing and even tracking their symptoms, that can give them motivation when things get difficult. And I will give you links to both of those. So my story, I was plant-based for 12 years. I was a management consultant, and then I got really, really sick. I struggled with anxiety, major depression, a crippling eating disorder. And I hit rock bottom when I started nursing my son. After 6 months, they put me on antibiotics, and then I had a breakdown, and then they put me on antidepressants and antipsychotics. And I was forced to stop nursing my son. And on Carnivore, I was able to nurse my youngest son for 5 years. So the last 3 years, he nursed maybe just one time for a couple minutes, but I don't suffer from depression. I believe that I am recovered or in recovery with my eating disorder, and I do not take any medications. I'm not on any BHRTs. I don't take any thyroid medications. And I think now I openly talk about that I'm not strict carnivore anymore. I think I was really strict carnivore, so not even seasonings from plants for 3 years. But now I'm maybe ketovore, carnivore-ish, where on most days I am meat-based. I think 95% of my meal is meat. And sometimes I'll add a little bit of plants. Sometimes I'll eat a little bit of ice cream. It's just, that is me trying to push the envelope of my healing journey. And I think that is ideal. I don't like it when in our carnivore community, people use beef only as a Band-Aid. We have to look further for why you can only tolerate beef. So yes, use beef to heal, but if beef only is where you're stuck after 5 years, you need further healing. And this is me, Nutrition with Judy, people's nutritionist. I believe that the right food is medicine, root cause healing with the Carnivore Cures elimination diet. And yeah, we are a source for the latest evidence-based science and wellness. And we believe in balancing real life with ideal eating. So I know a big question I often get is, well, I can't afford all the grass finished. I still think people can heal far greater eating ground beef, eggs, and butter from Walmart than eating a bunch of processed carbs. So I think we start somewhere and then we can refine and eliminate even further as we need to. But I do believe that wellness should be for all. Okay, thank you.